Well, thank you for being here, Federico. Is it Tobon or Tobon?
The Tobon works there.
Tobon.
Yeah.
Okay, good to know. I've been a fan of your work for a long time now. I know we've been communicating over Twitter and involved in the Make-Vember and all of that, but it's been too long waiting to actually have a conversation with you. So I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is cool.
All right. And for people who aren't familiar with your work, you've got, I'd be sending them to wolfCat Workshop, right? Or you're at wolfCat Workshop on both Twitter and on Instagram.
Yeah, that's great.
All right. And then I'll have all links in the show notes. Actually, I think I already have it pre-populated with stuff for people who are curious to see the things we'll be talking about here.
Cool.
But if there's anything you want to add, you let me know and I'll make sure it's in there.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. The website and Instagram. Somehow I still like getting Instagram followers. So it's always fun.
That's great. So tell me, like, where you are and what you're up to right now.
So I live in Los Angeles, in Koreatown specifically, and what I do, I've done a lot of things in my life, I guess, from like construction to solar projects to, and right now I teach. I'm teaching both middle school and high school at an after school program with a nonprofit organization. And then I also like make art and things on the side. I cannot stop myself from doing that. So that's what I'm doing now.
That's great. And how long ago did you get into teaching?
I'm like really new to teaching. I started 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And in previous jobs I had trained adults and different things, but then somehow I was really intimidated by trying to teach kids. I don't have kids of my own. And I met someone and they say like, oh, you should try and teach in this class. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to confront my fears because I don't know, kids seem pretty hard. And I volunteered for a little bit teaching an airplane class, like a radio controlled airplane, because I really enjoy those things. And I was like, okay, this is not so bad. Like, I mean, kids are little human beings. Like they're not they're not like aliens that they're hard to understand. And after I volunteered for a summer teaching this class, and like they offered me a job, and I was like, I had no idea I was qualified for this, but like let's try it. And it's been a serious like learning process for me. But interestingly enough, it's a fun opportunity to explore all these things that I am interested in. Like I'm interested in a lot of things, including like, graphic design and illustration and like electronics and working with cardboard and things like that. And so it really has become an interesting excuse to explore things and realize that sometimes because you know how to make something doesn't necessarily mean you can communicate how to make it or how you can teach someone.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's also a big like learning part for me, because I've discovered that a lot. Like initially I had this idea of like, oh, we're just gonna have fun making these airplanes, right? Like, and then I encountered the reality that sometimes is not completing the goal is not completing the project necessarily. Sometimes the goal is all the little things, all the little skills that you have. So I realized I had to start with like, oh, I see you don't know how to cut a straight line with a ruler and a blade. And so I spent a lot of time like learning how to hold the ruler, how to like trace a line, how to measure and things like that. So it really forces me to like take like something I took for granted and then like bring it down to like the small level skills or like the initial things.
Yeah, absolutely. It illuminates all those little things that you take for granted that you could teach someone. Now, are you specifically teaching like an art element to the class, or kind of like the STEAM education, or is there a broader teaching involved in that?
specifically STEAM. I'm like with the science, like we call it the scientific arts department. Just an excuse to do a lot of different things, but yeah, more on the STEAM side of things. The organization I work for is called Heart of Los Angeles. They do have an art program, but I somehow ended up involved with the STEAM department.
It's a lot of fun. I have the wonderful position to be on the Tinkercad social team, and so I see a lot of the audience that I see are educators like you who are doing all kinds of neat, fun, innovative things with kinetic artwork and 3D printing and design and automata and all that stuff. So it's a pleasure to be able to see all the different teachers who are pushing it forward and sharing lesson plans. It's a fun community to get an eye in.
Yeah, that interview you did with Becky Stern was like super useful to me. I was like teaching an Arduino class at the time, and I saw that and I was like, yeah, this is great. I'm gonna go use it. And
yeah,
I literally like started doing, like, I had the kids build the circuit in Tinkercad themselves, and basic like breadboard circuit with the Arduino. And then once they did it on Tinkercad, I had them like do it in real life. So it was kind of like a sort of double process where they had to like understand the connections on the screen and then do it themselves with the real objects. It's really neat. It's like
it's one of those features of Tinkercad that a lot of people don't know is there still, but it's nice to see that it's finally starting to get some traction. And yeah, breadboard, man, just even it was not so long ago that even I had to unpack the mysteries of breadboarding electronics, and I can relate to the challenge of that and trying to communicate that to a kid.
Yeah, but it's a really good tool. I'm kind of amazed at these kind of tools that we have available these days. Because I remember when I was a kid, like I did get an electronics kit that my father bought, and I was very confused with that thing for a long time. It was like there wasn't a lot of clarity, but I got through it somehow.
Well, now tell me about how you got interested in automata, because that's definitely the first time your work appeared to me was in the Make Member automata pieces you were making. Where did that start?
Where did that start? I guess some years ago, a friend showed me a book about automata. It was like by this Japanese guy. And then they were like all built from paper. And she built like a version of it. And I was like fascinated by seeing things, by seeing art that was like moving. And then I like got the book, and I didn't necessarily want to build all the paper models. It's actually, I have the book around here. This one. It's called this one. Can you see it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, karakuri.
Yeah, which is like the word in Japanese for that kind of craft, and so this book is cool because it has a number of like mechanisms at the beginning, and at some point I grabbed it and I started like building each one of the mechanisms, just kind of like a way to teach myself like the different options, and I built them out of like foam core and skewers and things like that. And that kind of like got me going. Like I guess I'm a very like tactile learner. I have to like build it myself and like see how it feels in my hands. And so after I built those, they were kind of like lying around for a while without like anything. And I just started like looking at other people's work. There's this guy, Rob Ives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He just designs these like really wonderful pieces, and I started like building some of his just to like get a feeling for it. And I suppose I had also like I have a background as an electrician. Like I worked for a long time doing that, and then I installed like solar projects, and at some point I worked at a big shop developing like systems for installing solar, which kind of got me to do a lot of like mechanical, I mean, interacting a lot with like mechanical engineers and like prototyping with like big water jet cutters and things like that. And so I ended up like bending a lot of metal, like, working with sheet metal and like making sheet metal prototypes of things. And so I have this like, I really enjoy working with like wire and bending things and like, and so I guess when I started doing the Make Vember ones, I like a lot of these things got combined. I started like mixing the metal stuff with the paper possibilities, and then I just had and just basic woodworking. So I think did I get to your question? Is this?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'm gonna do a screen share here and see if I can show some of this while we're talking about it too. See, go to this one. This is gonna jump ahead a little bit to the Totoro piece, but let's not do that. Let's talk about these little mechanisms here. See if we can see that. Is that coming up on the screen?
Yeah, I can see that.
All right, there you go. So yeah, these are where I first was really excited to try some of these too. Now, is it paperclip? A lot of these are just paperclip metal that you're winding up to create the mechanisms.
Yeah, I was using paper clips. I think my logic there, that was like I wanted to use just kind of readily available materials.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think paper clips are too hard to bend. I would like choose a different kind of wire if I were to do it again. But they're there, so
yeah, you can get a box of them pretty cheap. So, yeah. And so now the book you had, because my problem with these is that I feel like I want to just intuitively make these mechanisms, and then I wind up going in and realizing I really should have had a game plan in place before I start just kind of feeling my way around. But the early work you did, kind of getting maybe the language of how these mechanisms work, you feel like that really helped lay the groundwork for you being able to improvise with them?
I think so. I think once you get a few mechanisms, or you kind of understand them and build them a couple of times, then it really helps. Although I'd say some of these that you're showing, I consider those kind of failures. Like that little dragon, the one below the walking man. I wasn't super happy with that one because like I had an idea that it would be like a really nice flowing dragon, and as you can see, it's like a sort of, I don't know, crooked, kind of sad little guy.
He's on his last leg. He's a dying breed. So
yeah, but I still posted those because I was like trying to make one a day. And there were some days where like I just spent several hours just trying to come up with something interesting, and at the end it wasn't doing what I wanted.
But I have to imagine the time you spent just making the framework for this and the mechanism is what I'm looking at. It's like it's a great idea for how you've kind of put together the little block pieces that are driving off of the shaft to turn around the different pieces. Like, I know it probably is disappointing that the end result of the dragon doesn't behave maybe the way you'd have wanted, but there's still a lot for me to learn from this piece.
Yeah, I guess that's why I posted it, because the mechanism was somewhat more interesting than the actual motion that I got.
But also, I imagine, as you're probably telling your kids in your class a lot, sometimes those the things not turning out the way you want can be the most instructive pieces, right?
Yeah, and yeah, speaking of that, like I found myself making these really tiny things, but then yeah, when working with kids in particular, I have to like make them way bigger, because like sometimes I don't see myself that like how small and delicate these things are. Like take a bit more like skill and patience.
This is the one I think I copied from my turkey design, the flying bat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really encourage anyone watching this to take a look at your collection of these. You also have a video, I believe, here that collects a lot of them in like a 5-minute montage.
Yeah, I wanted to make it like convenient to watch.
It's
And
really great.
I think what I discovered with these is that paper, like initially, it was a bit of an accident. It was like I started doing the Make Member challenge, and literally what I had on my desk were just like, you know, paper clips and pieces of wood and paper. And initially, I didn't realize that paper was going to be so cool, because paper can behave in so many different ways. You know, if you bend it, you have a beam. If you, it also acts as a spring if you want, um, and sometimes it just has this like very like organic, like kind of living like motion that I didn't see as much in other types of automata that are like entirely made out of wood, which I
Right.
really like them, but somehow the paper gives this like extra springiness and kind of like living feeling to it.
Yeah, I think especially like the one that's being shown right now, where there's this whole arc that's bending. The motion you're able to get out of that is really unique, and you're right. I think that is something that struck me about it. Well, one is just the aesthetic of that you kind of landed on with the black paper and cutouts and the wood blocks, the tongue depressor here, or the clothespins that you're using to make the base. But there's a I like that you restrained yourself with the black paper. I feel like so many of these do err on the side of kind of kid crafty colorfulness, that there's something nice about being able to just focus on the actual piece that you're created here, and not it being an explosion of color.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was kind of trying to go for a slightly Japanese aesthetic there.
Well, let's talk about your most recent project here, because I feel like this sets the groundwork for I always want to say Totoro, but maybe it's Totoro. But I'll let you correct me. How did this piece come about?
So this one came about because there is a place here in LA called Giant Robot. They've been around for a while, and so they put cool shows with different artists, and they've been doing this Totoro inspired show for like 4 years, and so they invited me to like add a piece, and I was really happy because like, and for a while I've been trying to put something that moves and is a little bit interactive there, and this was like a good opportunity to try it, because I was like really inspired by this. In the movie, there is this that scene where they're growing these acorns, and so I made this piece, and this one I decided to just forget this business of like trying to make it accessible in a way. I was like, I'm just gonna use whatever. So I did a lot of laser cutting for that one, and I always have this like, I guess a complaint or a gripe is that very often when you go to museums, there are not that many things that you can touch yourself.
Right.
And so at least I wanted to have an element where like the people interact with it by this one in this particular case is just touching this button. So I just kind of like made it as simple as possible in that sense for the interactivity. So you touch the button, it's just a switch to get the motor started. And speaking of, and that battery I'm using, it's actually thanks to you. You introduced me to the 18650.
Yeah. So is that in a case, or is that a pack, like a USB pack?
So it's a single 18650 in the USB pack, so it's rechargeable. You can see the black box there. That's the USB pack. It's the first time I make a rechargeable art piece. That's something I've never done before.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to minimize the cords hanging out from your art. I like the little acorn door there for the USB port.
Yeah. Yeah, and I did I kind of spent a lot of time. I made a little video there for how the Switch gets assembled, because I was thinking like, oh, maybe I'll just put an arcade button on it. But then since the whole look of it is like wood based, then I ended up kind of making the button by, assembling this elaborate, set of layers. But I want it to be like clicky enough and have like a nice feel when you touch it. So the outside is made out of MDF, and then I just cut a bunch of little pieces to make the springs and the switch work in there.
Smart. I don't know if that's coming across on video or not, but yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love the acorn as the idea of the holder of the Switch too.
Yeah, it's funny because I had all these elaborate ideas for how to make it interact. Like at some point, I was thinking like, oh, maybe I'll add an infrared sensor, so when people go by, it like triggers the thing. And the reality of the deadline just hit me at some point.
Yeah,
and I just went with the simple switch, which I think is sufficient.
I think they keep it simple. It definitely helps.
Yeah.
Now, it's a lot of sophisticated, from my perspective, sophisticated, like the way you laid out the mechanisms here for like both the three different characters to, let me play it again, three different characters to animate, but also the acorns in the bed in front of them. And now those are all the growing acorns. Those are all one piece that's moving up and down, right?
Yeah, that's correct. It's a single piece.
And then on the background there's there's one main shaft that's turning, and then there's the acorn growing is like another shaft that's in line with it, and it's just kind of being raised up. So, but that central little kind of hook that's pulling it up.
Yeah, if you see the little hook somewhat near the middle, so I have actually a single shaft, like just one with the motor, and then when the shaft just moves, kind of pushes against the growing acorns, and they're kind of hooked up in such a way that the pushing motion turns into the up and down motion. Yeah, I didn't take a very good picture of how that works, but it's funny because like when I was making this piece, I didn't really have it was kind of very improvised. Like at some point I started with the box, then I had an idea what the motion should be like, and then I just started like making pieces to make it work. I guess that's how I work sometimes. I don't necessarily have like a whole idea how the whole thing is going to be. I just start improvising.
It's great, and I love that you included in your write-up here on your site all the different steps you took towards designing this. Let's also take a moment here to talk about the wonderful thing of these DC gear motors. I need to buy a handful of these to play around with. I sadly don't have any in my workshop here. But
yeah, this is the first time I bought a few to try them, and I really like these. I was surprised that a single one would move all that stuff, because I was expecting to use a couple, but this little guy did the job. I guess they're definitely a bit more expensive than servos, and they come in different RPMs. So
right.
this one is supposed to be rated at 30 RPMs at 6 volts, and you can buy like different speeds. And I got this one for like $4 or so, which is not too bad. I mean,
the price of those has come down a lot since when I first came across them.
Yeah, but so, it's an impressive torquey little motor. I was like happy with it.
Yeah, I feel like especially for like little slowly rotating art projects, they're super handy compared to, and quiet compared to something like a servo where they don't have that twitchy sound to them.
Right. Yeah. No, it is still a little bit noisy, but perhaps a bit more quiet. Also, you don't have to deal with all the electronics that you would do with the servo, or hack the servo too much.
Yeah. Now this first scene here where you got Totoro and you're figuring out the movements, are you using like foam core and brads, and how was this process?
Yeah, if you go one app, yeah, that was the first one. So the process there was, I had an idea for the motion, and then I just cut the pieces with scissors, and then I use pins on foam core to like figure out the first, how the motion is going to be. And I thought I was going to have to use like two linkages for the arms.
Mm-hmm.
Like that one has two for the arms to get like that. But I ended up going for a simpler version at the end, because these seem too complicated. Like the more linkages you add, the kind of the more unpredictable the motion becomes.
Right. You don't want one of them seizing up or getting stuck.
Yeah. And so at the end, I ended up going with just a single slit on the arm to allow for the full motion of the umbrella.
Yeah.
So yeah, the process would be, I prototype it out of paper with like simple stuff, and then once I have like a good idea how it goes, then I design it in Illustrator or Inkscape, and then I cut it and test it, and if it doesn't work, like make some changes and test it again. That's I guess that my love of the laser cutter has to do with the speed of how you can go from idea to object so quickly.
Yeah, it requires a lot less patience than 3D printing.
Yeah, way less patience, and you can go really fast in a way. Like a lot of these parts on the back of the piece were like, I was like making the thing work, and at some point the wires, the vertical wires were kind of like drifting left and right.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, oh, I'm just gonna make a little hole. What do you call it? Like a little guide for the wire. And so I just drew the guides, cut them, and glued them with super glue, and it was good to go.
And now these wires that you're using, is this like brass rod?
I did get some brass rods to try, but being the kind of scavenger I am, I had a lot of there's this stiff wire that you can get from bicycle tires. Like
Really?
if you cut the bead of the bicycle wire or the bicycle tire, some of them have these like really nice, very stiff wire that you can use for. I've used it before for like model airplanes, and that's mostly what I use. It's like kind of repurposed bicycle tire wires.
I mean, I love learning about things like that. What was the other time I did that? I was talking with Luke Vellacoop on one of these interviews here about how he creates his thumb pianos.
Oh, the Kalimbas,
yeah. And he was talking about the scavenged materials he loves, and that led me to one thing I love finding, and my wife hates this, is street sweeper bristles.
Oh yeah.
Street. I'll run out to the middle of the street if I see one shining up at me, and it grosses people out. But also,
I love that, but they're so hard to find, those street sweeper.
I know.
Like at some point we were like doing a lock picking class, and we were like, oh, we need some of those for the torque bars, and they were so hard to find. Like when you need like several.
Right. It's like a 4-leaf clover situation. Like, I found one. But also for tires, for bike tires, the spokes that come out of them. I've been keeping I've despoked a tire before, or a rim, rather, and kept all those little spoke pits. And then recently, another one I scavenged was also, I had to replace the windshield wipers on my car. And
oh yeah, those are great.
Luke was talking about the spring steel that's on the back of the windshield wiper rubber. If you can peel that rubber off, so I've got those sitting in a pile. This is now turned into an interview where I'm confessing all of the weird things that I hoard. But
yeah, I do the same. Like every time I go by when it it rarely rains in LA, but when it rains, then I go by the auto store nearby. And there's a pile of windshield, discarded windshield that have been replaced, wipers that have been replaced, and I just sit there and grab all the little all that spring steel from them. So I have a pile of that.
Oh yeah. So now you're giving me a new one. I'm going to be checking out bike tires, like nice bike tires, because I've seen them discarded pretty frequently, and to know that there's like that metal wire to be scavenged. I've also heard that like printers, I see discarded printers all the time, that the metal that they use for the things like the rollers or within the printer, somehow there's people who scavenge those out. Those are like the pearl to be taken from the oyster of those things that are out on the curb.
You can also get some usable steppers out of 3D printers. Like I recently, I took one apart and I was playing around with the Adafruit motor shield, and it handled the steppers from the printer rather well. I was like kind of happy with that.
Yeah. Now then it just becomes the stockpile of the remains of the stripped down printers that are taking up space in your garage.
Yeah, I have a box full of like random motors for sure that I've been scavenging, and yeah, it's a weird thing to do. But I mean, I also have like a box full of power supplies, like wall warts and things like that. Like I'm constantly looking for those things. It's like funny.
Yeah, because there's just that moment where you need that one. Like, oh, I need a 12-volt power supply to make this thing work. Yeah, I've got plenty of those too. The other one,
now that you mentioned that, like I've been looking more for the old transformer ones, because somehow like when I try to use the switching power supplies that are more common these days with a motor, they read the motor as a short circuit, so they don't work. And so, but the ones that are just a transformer, an old school transformer, they handle motors kind of well.
The ones that are more of like the wall wart style, where the transformer is right there by the prongs.
Yeah. So they have like a chunky, heavy transformer inside. Anyway, that's a little. If your power supply doesn't work, it's because sometimes the switching ones read the motors as like a short circuit, so they do this like little clicking sound, which means they're starting, but then they're stopping because they think it's a short circuit.
That's a great tip. No, I'm glad you mentioned it. Now I got another thing to scout it out for and keep an eye out for, hoarding into the piles in the corner of my studio here. Yeah. The other thing I was going to say is hacksaw blades. I've been collecting those after talking to Luke too, because it is a kind of spring steel that can be, if you file down the sharp stabby edge, they can be really useful for some pianos too. I really wanted to get a kalimba together for Makevember, and it never materialized, but I've got the materials now. Well, Federico, I don't want to take up any more of your time. This has been a great interview. I loved all the insight you gave me on building automata, from small ones to the beautiful one that you've created for your giant robot. Has the giant robot show happened yet?
No, it opens this Saturday. So it's gonna be, the opening is gonna be this Saturday, the 15th, and the piece is gonna be there for a couple of weeks.
That's great. Well, anyone in the area, the Los Angeles area, should go check it out. And it looks like it'd be a lot of fun to play with, and it sounds like a cool show idea anyway. So I'm glad you're a part of it. And anyone else who wants to see more of your work, can check out the links down here in the description. And I hope they do, because you've got so many other things that we haven't even touched on here. Glad we didn't, because I can save them for another interview down the line where I can talk to you about your artwork, your illustrations, and all the other things that you do. So thank you for taking the time to talk with me here today, though.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
All right. And great meeting you finally.
Yeah, this was good.
Talk to you again soon, Federico.
Cool. Thank you.